What's up, everybody? It's Tessa. Welcome back to another episode of the Social Alchemy Human Design Podcast. Today, I want to talk about something that has been requested both in my practice and from listeners, which is how do I navigate my partnership or my intimate relationship with my person through the lens of human design? And boy, oh boy, is this not the most life changing subject and at the core of what human design and social alchemy are all about. They really go hand in hand. Understanding other is always leading to more understanding of oneself, right? Now, there are a few key things that I want to talk about today to help make this make sense. And in order to do that, I first want to share a little bit of personal information about my life and as it relates to human design in my marriage. I am about a year married. Holy crap. It's crazy how fast this year has gone. And if I could just illuminate one or two things about the wedding planning process that were extremely helpful to know one another's human design, it would be the emotional wave process. So, majority of the population, about 58% of the population, makes decisions off of their emotional feelings. And often their feelings cloud their mood and their perspective on the day. Now, these people will have a defined solar plexus center, and that defined solar plexus center means that it's easier for them to feel how they're feeling than it is for them to feel how someone else might be feeling, right? We're so in our own bodies, if you have that defined solar plexus, that while we can empathize with others, we're empathizing often mentally. So understanding is coming cerebrally or from the head and ajna center rather than physically. Now, this is true. This is the case for both myself and my husband. We both have defined solar plexus centers, which means we have emotional waves. Now, the emotional waves that we have are slightly different. Of course, this means that we're not always at the peak of the wave at the same time, or we're not always low at the same time either, but we are directly impacted by one another as we're spending the majority of our time together in the same environment, our home. Now, our wedding was one of our first major times that we were consistently making joint decisions. There was never a moment or a decision with which we handed it over to the other person and said, you take the reins, you just do what you think is best. We were fully collaborating on every step of the way. Now, this got a little testing for us at times because when one person was certain about something or had already arrived at clarity on their emotional wave, the other person had not yet. And what we would find if we kind of jumped the boat, or I was really feeling certain about the location that our actual ceremony would be on, which would be the beach or the kind of lawn area, and my husband Jake was not yet, I would say, it's fine. I know it. I visualized it. I had a dream about it, blah, 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 blah. I would fast forward to that. And then a few days later, after we had made that decision to get married on the beach, he would be like, oh, I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still not feeling settled. In which case, it would send me on an emotional wave ride again of frustration. Why don't you understand where I'm coming from or what my vision is? And then the spiral. Therefore, the more united we could be when we actually hit send on the email or hit the commitment button or signed our names, the less work we had to do after the fact. And I cannot understate how we were actively figuring that out in the wedding planning process. And then once we did, and we realized, oh, both of us need to have clarity before we decide something, not strong arming one another, that's the best place for us to be. And that way we don't have to keep talking about something over and over and over again. We can just be like, oh, I'm still thinking about it. That means I'm not ready to commit. Deadline, schmedlines, I'm not ready. And the more that both of us were on all the calls or in all the text change, that was also really helpful for us too. Now, I know that a lot of people plan their weddings separately, not as a duo, and that might be aligned for your human designs. You could have one person has a sacral center defined and no solar plexus defined, and then the other has an emotional solar plexus. So that person is riding the wave, and then the other person is getting the direct response at the end. Yes, that sounds great. No, keep thinking about it. Now, that would be pretty incredible. But for two people like us, we are, I'm a generator, he's a mani gen. Like I said, both have emotional solar plexus. and different cadences were making those decisions, it was really important that we both respected one another and arrived at them together. Now, if I were to zoom out for a second, I would tell you that the most important thing that you can learn in partnership is the person in front of you's authority. So, what is their inner authority, and when and how, and what does it look like when they're making their best decision? This is the most important thing. Now, even if on the surface you have the same authority, sacral, splenic, splenic, emotional, now you want to go deeper than that in a reading or in understanding those channels that are present that are defining those centers. What makes them tick and what makes that authority turn on? And then when you know that, you can really guide that person, your partner, back to that place instead of strong arming them. Now, I really believe that most of us are strong arming one another more than we even realize, and it's with pretty good intent, but it happens all the time. And something I'm learning right now in a program that I'm in, which is called Body Based Breakthrough. Shout out to Matthew Cook, dear friend of mine. He runs this incredible somatic training called Body Based Breakthrough, or B3. And in our course this week, he was talking about how each person has what's called a window of tolerance, or a window of presence with which they are really able to make agreeable decisions, to communicate to the best of their ability, and to get to the bottom of a problem and find a solution. Now, many things in our lives take us outside of that window of tolerance, high or low. And oftentimes we end up catching one another in those highs and lows, especially when you're in a relationship. And we're not always lined up in the same place. So while I might be in my window of tolerance, my husband may very well not be in his window of tolerance. So if I try and make our conversation about getting him into his window of tolerance, I have already failed. I am already not relating to him on where he's at. Now, if he comes to me and I notice that he's outside of his window of tolerance, the first thing that I want to do is understand his design, his inner authority, so that I can point that arrow right back into the core of his being to get him plugged back into his own source and not fill him up with my own ideas and opinions. I cannot understate how much work this takes and how much time it takes, but the devotion to understanding another is deeply rewarding. One of the most rewarding things of my life. Now, back to that strong arming thing. Strong arming can look, like I said, very differently for each person, but it's often the person with a defined center, right? Our defined centers create expectations. So wherever we have a lit up, colorful center in our body is where we often expect other people to operate the exact same way. Where we have lit up and defined centers in our body graph is where we expect other people to operate the same way. And not only that, but we are also impacting the people who don't operate the same way as us with our way of thinking, feeling, doing, being in the world. And this gets really confusing because someone might be with you and you have the defined center and they have the undefined center. And so when they're with you, they're almost cosplaying or amplifying your defined center. And you feel simpatico meaning compatible, one another, similar, on the same page. But then when they separate from you, they start doing the opposite. Now, that's your first sign that someone has a different defined center than you, is if later on they're doing the exact opposite thing. This is totally normal too. It's all a part of our subconscious and unconscious operating system. And that's why I'm so passionate about human design, to teach people what centers of theirs are defined and which are not. And so what to look out for in the world. And sometimes it's helpful to know statistically the percentages of people who have these defined centers and not. So you kind of know how many people in the room are likely to be similar to you and how many are not. But I'm going to put that aside. Maybe I'll do another podcast on that. But so you're impacting one another with those defined centers. And so I'll often hear about one partner who has a strong expectation of someone just to be able to move more quickly to get it done. Whereas the other person might be a lot more slow, diligent. They might have less of a spontaneous decision making, but more of a, I want to be sure by the time I say yes to something. those are often people who have defined head or ajnas or defined hearts. And the defined heart, head, and ajna people are very, very um, diligent with their commitments, and they don't speak things out that they know they won't be able to follow through on. Now, the majority of the population is the opposite. We understand that a lot of our decisions can be undone and can be undone rather quickly. And it's not such a big deal if you change your mind on something. Now we're often attracted to the opposite, right? So our undefined head, ajna, heart people are attracted to the defined head, ajna, and heart people because they have something that we don't have. They have patience, they have diligence, they have slowness, right? They are meticulous, and they're attracted to us because we move a lot more spontaneously, and we can be more fun, and we're not as serious. So you can begin to see that often this is why opposites attract. And people will come to me for a couples reading, really wanting to understand one another, because beyond being impacted by someone who's the opposite, which creates your initial attraction, when you're in that real relationship, when you're in the the brick and mortar container of your relationship, it feels differently as that attraction changes and that love diffuses into other forms, more friendship, more family love, more roles and responsibilities. We often begin to see that that changes. And where once we were attracted to something, now we're getting impacted by it, and it's impacting our day to day. So, for example, someone who is very meticulous and diligent in their decision making will try and force a longer timeline on a decision to someone who is more spontaneous or has a spontaneous inner knowing. This can create tension because often the person who has undefined centers, undefined head, ajna, and heart, will be under the influence of the more diligent, meticulous person. And this can create a not self theme, or a version of the person who is not in alignment with themselves because they're cosplaying the way that you want them to. And so if you have a lot of undefined centers, or you have a lot of undefined centers and your partner has the opposite defined, first of all, you're going to be in that attraction bubble for a while, and then you're going to enter into that impact zone where people who have undefined centers, I notice this by far across the board, perceive the person who has the defined centers as being better at many things when it comes to decision making or communicating or certainty or clarity, etc. And the undefined center person will often wish they were more like that person, so they'll try to be. Now, this is why we want to understand one another's inner workings in each other's charts, even at a bird's eye view, so that you can say, hey, I know that I'm really diligent, and I know that I am meticulous when it comes to how I keep my space and how I make decisions, but I do not expect that of you. What I love about you is you. I love your chaotic. I love your messy. I love your intuitive. I love your spontaneous decision making. And I need more of that in my life. So when we come together to make these joint decisions, let me check in with you to make sure that your yes stays consistent. And let you give me time and space to make sure that my decision is meticulous and diligent on behalf of both of us. Now, what we don't want to do is just pass over the major decision-making points off to one person, because that will end up in a cycle of resentment and pressure. And we don't want to put pressure either on our defined centered homies or partners, because they carry a lot of pressure in the world as it is. So these are just a few things that are really impacting us relationally. And I really want to highlight those few attributes. So the differences between our defined and undefined centers, and the differences between our authorities. Know each other's authorities intimately. And if you don't, hit me up. Let's do a deep dive into it. There are plenty of ways that you guys could be better relating to one another in order to be in more unity, love, side by sideness, and general compassion for one another. And then also a lot of passion. Who doesn't want that? Now, if you have any questions about this, feel free to send me a message on Instagram at Social Alchemy Institute. I could talk about this all day long, but I think we should do a deep dive on centers and authorities next, so that you can begin to compare and contrast the two. And if you don't know anything about human design, you can begin to look at people's charts and understand a little bit more about what's going on there just from looking at it at the surface. And if you haven't listened to my previous episode on the 5 types, generators, manifesting generators, projectors, manifestors, and reflectors, I highly recommend that. And a couple of weeks ago, I put out a podcast that's like a level 101 about human design in general. It's 9 minutes long. Feel free to listen to that. If you just want to get the basics covered and the origin story, that's all in there. And if you want to hear reading with me, my readings are extremely affordable and amazing. They come with a full slideshow and a PDF that you get to keep that's evergreen. It's fully made for you, diving deep into your type, strategy, authority, your profile, your centers. And then I typically include a little bit about your digestion environment and strongest sense or some of your gifts that are shining through. And I kind of create those intuitively to see what would be most juicy and impactful for you during our reading, and then for you to self-learn or do me search on afterwards. That's all I have for now, you guys. Much love. I hope you have a beautiful day and that you enjoy this wherever you are. Mwah.